The noon train screamed its way into Dry Creek like a wounded animal, brakes shrieking, iron wheels throwing sparks against the rails. Dust rose in thick clouds, coating boots, hats, and the waiting men who stood stiffly along the platform. Most of them had come for the same reason, to see the mail-order bride they'd heard whispers about. A woman sent west by paper and promise, meant to become a wife in a land where loneliness stretched farther than the plains. When she stepped down from the train, silence fell. She was smaller than they'd imagined, wrapped in a travel-worn coat, one gloved hand gripping a leather trunk as if it were the last solid thing she owned. Her face was pale from weeks of travel, eyes scanning the unfamiliar land with caution and quiet resolve. She looked like someone who had learned not to expect kindness. But it wasn't her fear that stirred the crowd, it was her shape. Even beneath layers of fabric, the truth showed. The gentle curve at her belly told a story this town wasn't ready to hear. A murmur spread, quick and sharp as prairie wind through dry grass. She's with child, must be mistaken. No man ordered that. She felt the judgment before she heard it. Her spine stiffened. She had known this moment would come. All through the journey west, she'd rehearsed explanations that no one would want to hear. She hadn't come to deceive, only to survive. Among the men waiting stood Tall Elk. He did not push forward. He did not whisper. He watched. Tall Elk had chosen a mail-order bride not out of desperation, but necessity. His land needed a household. His life needed balance. Loss had taken enough from him, family, time, certainty, and he was done letting fate decide alone. When the letter arrived describing a woman willing to come west, he answered with few words and honest intent. Now he studied her face, not her belly. He saw fear held in check by pride. He saw weariness earned the hard way. And he saw courage, because stepping off that train took more of it than most men in Dry Creek would ever need. The station master cleared his throat. "Miss," he said, uncertain, "you're expected?" She nodded. "I am." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. She turned slowly, eyes moving across the gathered men until they landed on Tall Elk. He stood apart from the rest, taller, broader, his dark hair bound neatly at the nape of his neck. His expression was calm, unreadable, but not cruel. "You answered my letter?" she asked. "I did," he said simply. The crowd waited for him to speak again. Some leaned forward, eager for rejection. Others smirked, already certain of scandal. The preacher nearby shifted uncomfortably, as if shame were contagious. She swallowed. "Before you say anything," she began, voice catching despite her efforts, "there's something you should know." Tall Elk raised a hand, not to stop her, but to give her space. "I see," he said. Her eyes widened. "Then I see a woman who crossed a continent alone," he continued. "That tells me more than rumors ever could." A ripple of unease passed through the onlookers. She stared at him, unsure she'd heard correctly. "I won't blame you if you send me away," she said. "I was told this was my last chance. I didn't come to trick anyone." Tall Elk stepped closer, close enough that the others could hear him clearly. "This land is hard," he said. "It does not forgive lies, but it respects truth." She nodded, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "Then you deserve mine." The wind carried her silence across the platform. Tall Elk looked at her belly again, then back to her face. In his people's way, children were gifts, not burdens. Blood mattered, but so did responsibility. So did choice. He turned to the watching crowd. "She came to be a wife," he said, "and she will be. The child she carries will not be turned away." A gasp escaped someone behind them. He faced her once more, voice low, steady. "If you are willing to stay," he said, "then I will raise them both." The words landed like thunder. In that moment, Dry Creek learned something it had long forgotten, that the West was not only built by guns and grit, but by mercy, courage, and the rare strength to choose compassion when judgment came easier. And for the woman who had stepped off the train with nothing but fear and hope, everything changed. That evening, the sky over Dry Creek burned red and gold as the sun slipped behind the hills. Tall Elk's homestead stood just beyond the edge of town, far enough to avoid prying eyes, close enough to remind the world he did not hide. The house was simple but solid, built with patient hands and careful purpose. It smelled of cedar smoke and clean earth. She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to step inside. "You may come in," Tall Elk said, setting her trunk down gently. "This is your home now if you choose it." If you choose it, the words mattered. No man had offered her a choice in a long time. Inside, the room was quiet, warmed by a low fire. A woven blanket lay folded near the hearth. She eased herself into a chair, hands resting instinctively over her belly. The child shifted, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Tall Elk poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. He did not sit across from her like a judge. He sat beside the fire, giving her space to speak or not. She stared into the cup for a long moment before lifting her eyes. "You deserve the truth," she said softly. "All of it." "I am listening," he replied. Her voice trembled at first, but once the words began, they came steadily. She spoke of the town back east where she'd grown up poor and hopeful, of the man who promised marriage but vanished when she told him she was with child. She spoke of the whispers that followed her, the doors that closed, the work she could no longer find. Shame had not come from her own heart, but from the mouths of others. When the letter about the mail order program came, she said, "I knew it was my only chance. Not for love, just survival." She braced herself for anger. Instead, Tall Elk nodded slowly. "My people know what it means to be judged without mercy," he said. "We know what it means to lose land, family, and standing without committing any wrong." She looked at him, surprised. "Then you're not angry?" "No," he said. "But I must ask one thing." Her shoulders tightened. "What is it?" "Will you stay because you want to?" he said, "or because you believe you have nowhere else to go?" The question struck deeper than she expected. She had prepared to defend herself, but not to be understood. "I want to stay," she said at last. "I want to build something honest. For the child. For myself." Tall Elk considered her answer. Among his people, marriage was not ownership, it was responsibility. To choose a family was a sacred act, one not undone lightly. "My first wife died many winters ago," he said quietly. "Sickness took her. And our son." His voice did not waver, but grief lived in the pauses between his words. "Since then, my home has been strong but empty." She reached for him without thinking, stopping just short. He noticed and gently closed the distance himself. "Blood does not make a father," he continued. "Presence does. Teaching does. Staying does." Tears slipped down her cheeks, unashamed now. "The town will never accept me," she whispered. "Then we will not live for the town," Tall Elk replied. That night she lay awake beneath a heavy quilt, listening to the wind pass through the trees. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. For the first time since she'd felt the child move within her, she believed the future might hold more than endurance. Outside, Tall Elk stood beneath the stars, thinking of the choice he had made. He knew hardship would come: mockery, threats, rejection. But he also knew this: the strength of a man was measured not by what he claimed, but by what he protected. By morning, the truth would be known across Dry Creek. But tonight, two strangers shared something rarer than certainty: mutual respect. And in the quiet space between them, a family began to take shape. The next morning, Dry Creek woke to a wind that carried more than dust, it carried gossip. Word spread like wildfire. The mail-order bride had arrived, and she was already with child. Whispers snaked through saloons, general stores, and along the boardwalks, growing louder with each retelling. Men shook their heads in disapproval, and women clutched their aprons, murmuring about shame and scandal, but Tall Elk was unmoved. He rode into town alongside her that morning, not to announce judgment or stir controversy, but simply to show that she was under his protection. His horse's hooves clattered on the wooden planks, eyes steady and proud, as though daring anyone to question him. He was not angry. He was resolute. And that distinction mattered. The townsfolk, however, did not see it that way. At the general store, the preacher hesitated behind the counter, pretending to rearrange boxes while casting nervous glances. "It's improper," he muttered to anyone who would listen. "A child not her husband's. And she comes here as a bride?" The bride, now under Tall Elk's informal guardianship, stood tall beside him, feeling the weight of every whispered insult. Her heart pounded not out of fear of him, but of the world around them. She had expected rejection. She had feared cruelty, but nothing could prepare her for the sheer stubbornness of judgment from a town so quick to assume. Tall Elk did not speak for hours, but his presence was its own statement. Neighbors who thought to sneer instead felt the quiet force of someone unshaken. He did not need to fight them or shout. Strength, in this moment, was measured by calm endurance, by protecting those who could not yet protect themselves. Small kindnesses began to emerge. Among the tension, Mrs. Callahan, the widow who ran the boarding house, brought baskets of fresh bread and warned quietly, "Some of them may speak, but they do not know you. You do not answer to them." At the general store, a young boy tripped over a sack of flour, and she smiled at him, simple human connection in the midst of judgment. These moments were like cracks of sunlight through a storm, small but enough to remind her that not everyone in Dry Creek was cruel. Tall Elk guided her through the day, introducing her not as a scandalous bride, but as a new member of the community. He spoke of the land, of his family's history, and of the responsibilities she would share not as a burden, but as a partner. She noticed the shift in people's reactions when he spoke. Some still whispered, yes, but fewer sneered. Authority tempered fear, and in the West, a man's word carried weight. Yet the town's prejudice was stubborn. Children would point, men would mutter, and neighbors would pass judgmental glances as she walked the streets with Tall Elk. Each day was a lesson in endurance. She learned not to flinch, not to lower her head, and not to retreat. With Tall Elk at her side, she felt the courage to face whispers and disapproval. On. By the end of the day, she began to see the subtle changes. The same people who had questioned her presence now looked at her with tentative respect. They had not embraced her fully, but they were learning that courage and integrity mattered more than gossip. Tall Elk had taught her an essential lesson. The world would judge relentlessly, but standing firm, showing honesty and patience, would eventually carve space for acceptance. That night, as she returned home to the small cabin by the edge of the plains, she rested her hands on her belly and felt the child move. It was a reminder that life, stubborn and unbending, would continue despite the town's whispers. Tall Elk tended the fire and watched her with quiet admiration, proud of the bravery she had shown. And in that moment, she realized something vital. Judgment would always exist, but so would those willing to rise above it. Together, they were beginning to build not only a family but a shield against the cruelty of the world. For the first time since her journey west began, she believed that courage, loyalty, and mutual respect could conquer fear, even in a town that didn't yet approve. Winter had loosened its grip on the plains, but the wind still carried a sharp bite. Inside the small cabin on the edge of Tall Elk's homestead, the fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick with anticipation and quiet fear, the kind that only comes before a life-changing moment. The bride, her hands resting on her swollen belly, felt every flutter, every kick, every impatient nudge from the life growing inside her. She was about to meet the child who had already changed everything about her existence. Tall Elk sat close by, his strong frame a steady presence. He said little, understanding that words were unnecessary. His dark eyes never left her face, watching the rhythm of her breathing, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands instinctively sought comfort from the warmth of his. He had been there through the long journey west, through the scrutiny of the town, through every whisper and sneer. Now he would be there through the birth itself. Hours passed slowly, measured by the fire and the groans of labor that shook her small frame. Outside, snow began to fall, coating the plains in a blanket of white as silent witness to a miracle in motion. The cabin, modest and rough, seemed suddenly sacred. Walls built of cedar and stone now held more than shelter. They held courage, hope, and the beginning of a family. When the child finally came, the cry pierced the quiet like a trumpet, fierce and unwavering. She wept, tears mingling with sweat, as the tiny life was laid into her arms. A boy strong, red-faced, and full of the same stubborn determination she had seen in her own reflection. The first thing he felt was warmth, and the first thing he knew was protection. Tall Elk stepped forward, reverent and deliberate. He took the baby in his hands, inspecting the small creature not as an intruder or a complication, but as the continuation of life itself. Then, with a solemnity that carried the weight of tradition and personal commitment, he whispered the child's name aloud. In his people's language, it meant new dawn, a promise of hope, resilience, and belonging. The bride watched him, astonished and moved. She had feared rejection, feared judgment, feared the cruel whispers of townsfolk who would never understand her past. Instead, she found herself surrounded by acceptance and love. This man, who had every right to turn away, chose to claim not only her, but the child she carried. His actions spoke louder than any words could. In the days that followed, life settled into a rhythm. The town still murmured, but fewer voices spoke of scandal and shame. Neighbors began to respect the small family, even if reluctantly. Tall Elk and the bride worked side by side tending the land, preparing meals and caring for the infant. Each moment of shared responsibility deepened their bond. It became clear that fatherhood was not a matter of blood but of devotion, presence, and courage. The child grew quickly, thriving under the protection and guidance of Tall Elk and the nurturing care of his mother. The baby's laughter echoed across the plains, a sound so bright it seemed to push back the lingering judgment of the town. Even those who had once whispered cruelly could not ignore the joy and vitality that now defined the small homestead. The bride, once timid and burdened by shame, found a new strength in motherhood and in her partnership with Tall Elk. She realized that love and family could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. She had come west alone, carrying fear and uncertainty. And now she found herself embraced not only by a man of honor but by a child who had transformed their lives. Tall Elk often watched her quietly, marveling at her resilience. "You've done more than survive," he said one evening as the baby slept. "You've built a family where others would see only scandal. That is courage, and it belongs to both of us now." Together, they understood a profound truth. Family is not always born from what is expected, but from what is chosen, nurtured, and protected. In the shadow of prejudice and the harsh realities of the frontier, love had found a way. And in that love, the promise of a new life, bright, unafraid, and full of hope, had been born. Spring had returned to the plains, painting the hills with fresh green and wildflowers. Life at the homestead had settled into a rhythm. The baby's laughter filled the cabin. The animals grazed peacefully in the pastures. And Tall Elk and the bride worked side by side, building a life on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. Yet, even in this fragile peace, shadows of the past lingered. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, a man from her life before the West, the one who had abandoned her and left her to bear a child alone. His approach stirred fear that had long lain dormant, a reminder that her past was never far behind. He carried the same smug expression she remembered, one that suggested entitlement, control, and the belief that the child and she could be claimed like property. She froze, hands resting on the child's tiny head, heart pounding. She had imagined this moment countless times during the long journey west, but reality struck differently. She felt anger, shame, and a flicker of hope all tangled together in a single, powerful knot. Tall Elk noticed immediately. He stepped forward, eyes narrowed, stance steady. There was no panic, no haste. Just presence, authority, and unwavering protection. The man halted at the edge of the homestead, clearly unprepared for the quiet strength that faced him. "I have come for what is mine," the man said, voice dripping with arrogance. "The child, the woman you belong to me." Tall Elk's response was measured, deliberate. "No," he said simply. "You claim nothing here." The former lover sneered, circling the yard as if the open plains would grant him courage. "You think a child not of your blood can be yours to raise? That she can choose you over me?" The bride took a step forward, her voice firm. "I choose the life we've built. I choose him, and I choose my child. Neither of us belongs to you." Tall Elk placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent shield. "The law in the East may have been in your favor, but out here, family is built on choice, not cruelty. You leave or you face what justice requires." His words were calm, but they carried the weight of a man who had survived loss, prejudice, and hardship, and had the power to protect those he loved. The man's arrogance faltered. He looked around, realizing that this wasn't the timid woman he had left behind. This wasn't the helpless child she once was. Standing beside her was a man of honor and strength, and together they formed a bond unbroken by distance or time. "Can't," the man stammered. "This isn't right." "You are wrong," Tall Elk said, voice steady. "This family is ours. You may walk away or you may leave by force. But the choice of this woman and the child she carries is final." The man, seeing no advantage, spurred his horse and rode off, leaving only the dust of his departure in his wake. The bride's hand shook, but she was not afraid. She had stood firm, protected not just by Tall Elk, but by the courage she had discovered within herself. Inside the cabin, she sank into a chair, the baby nestled safely in her arms. Tall Elk sat beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You were brave," he said. "Not for me, but for yourself and your child. That is the kind of courage the West respects." Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and a newfound sense of empowerment. The man from her past had tried to reclaim what he never earned, and he had failed. In doing so, she realized that true family was defined not by blood or claims, but by loyalty, protection, and the choice to stand together. Even in the face of threats. As night fell, the fire crackled and the child slept peacefully between them, unaware of the confrontation that had occurred, but safe because of it. The bride leaned into Tall Elk, feeling the strength of a partnership built on more than survival, on trust, love, and honor. For the first time since her arrival in the West, she understood fully the past could chase her, but it could not define her. Her family, chosen, nurtured, and fiercely protected, would grow strong on the plains. free from judgment and unbound by fear. And so, against the shadows of the past, they stood together, ready to face the future with courage, love, and an unbreakable bond. Summer had settled over the plains, painting the hills with gold and the rivers with silver light. The homestead of Tall Elk and his bride had transformed from a shelter into a home, one filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet rhythm of family life. The baby, now toddling with unsteady but determined steps, ran across the yard with a wooden stick in hand, imagining it a sword, a staff, or simply a companion in play. His laughter echoed across the fields, a sound so bright and alive it seemed to soften the hard edges of the frontier itself. Inside the cabin, the bride worked at the hearth, preparing the evening meal. The smells of bread, roasted meat, and herbs mingled in the warm air. She paused for a moment, watching the child play through the window, and felt a deep sense of peace. She had come west with fear and uncertainty, carrying not only her own hopes but the burden of a child conceived in abandonment. And yet, here she was protected, respected, and loved. Tall Elk emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. His dark eyes softened as they fell on her. "He is strong, just like his mother," he said, nodding toward the yard. She smiled, a gentle curve of relief and gratitude. "And brave," she added. "He knows we will keep him safe. He knows what family means." Tall Elk came closer and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Family is not always born of blood," he said quietly. "It is built through choice, through protection, through sacrifice, and through love. You and I chose this life, and together we have raised something precious. That is stronger than any claim, any prejudice, any hardship." The bride felt tears sting her eyes. Not tears of fear, not tears of shame, but tears of triumph. She had faced judgment, hardship, and the shadows of her past. She had learned the meaning of courage on the frontier, not the flash of a gun, but the quiet determination to protect those you love and to claim your own happiness against the odds. Even the town had begun to change. Neighbors who once whispered now offered nods of respect, small acknowledgments of the life she had built and the courage she had shown. The child, innocent and unknowing of the scrutiny once cast upon him, had become a bridge between two worlds, the traditions of Tall Elk's people and the resilience she had carried from her own. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky burned with shades of crimson and gold, they all sat outside together, the bride, Tall Elk, and the child. The air was warm, filled with the soft hum of crickets and the distant calls of prairie birds. She leaned against Tall Elk, feeling the steady strength of his presence. He reached over and took the child's small hand in his, and the three of them watched the horizon in silence, united. "This is our home," she said softly. "Yes," Tall Elk replied. "Not a home forced by circumstance, but one chosen with courage. We have built it together." The child, sensing the calm and safety around him, laughed and ran toward the edge of the field, his small footsteps stirring dust and flowers alike. The bride and Tall Elk exchanged a look of quiet pride. Their journey had been hard, filled with fear, whispers, and the threat of loss, but it had led them here, to a place where love and honor prevailed. In the vastness of the West, among open skies and endless plains, they had forged a life on choice, respect, and unwavering devotion. The town had learned a lesson, too, that family is not defined by scandal, by birth, or by judgment, but by the bonds that are nurtured, protected, and chosen with heart and courage. As night fell, the fire burned bright outside the cabin, casting long shadows across the yard. The child slept, safe and warm. The bride rested against Tall Elk, her hand on her belly once more, feeling the steady pulse of life she had fought to protect. In the quiet, she understood something profound. Happiness is not given, it is built. And they had built it, together against all odds. The West could be harsh and unforgiving, but in their small corner of it, love had triumphed. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. The end.